Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, What Are Digital Twins Anyways? This webinar is brought to you by Applied Software. My name is Misty Scott, and I am pleased to be your moderator today. We will begin with a quick intro video on how to get the most out of this webinar and interact with us today. All right, here we go.
Hi, and welcome to this Applied Software webinar. We're glad you could join us today. Get more out of the webinar by clicking on the icons at the bottom of your screen. You can resize these. This button leads to resources. This button adjusts the volume. Just don't push this one. I'm watching you. Be sure to find Applied Software on social media and on our website, asti.com, where we'll empower you to discover what's possible. You can also find a complete schedule of upcoming events, on-demand webinars, and training on our calendar at asti.com/calendar. This is being recorded for your convenience. You'll be receiving an email with the recording link for future reference. And make sure to stick around. We'll answer questions at the end. See you there.
All right, as the video mentioned, you can find a schedule of upcoming events, webinars, and training on our calendar at asti.com/calendar. So make sure you check that out. I am super pleased to announce our speaker today. Christopher Riddell is the Director of Innovation at Applied Software and podcast host of the AEC Disruptors. With over 12 years of experience in his field, Christopher is a strong strategic thinker and design professional with a Bachelor of Science in Architect and Master in Building Construction and Facility Management, focused in integrated project delivery from Georgia Institute of Technology, and an MBA from KSU, Kennesaw State University. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today. And for all those who are attending, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, go ahead and plug them in the chat box. We will visit them throughout the webinar or at the end. At this point, Christopher, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks. All right. So today we're here to talk about digital twins. And so for some of you may have participated in other conversations I've presented on around this. And so the hope here is to take a little different take on it. So there's going to be a handful of things we want to talk about. We're going to talk about what are they, just kind of at a high level, so we all have that simple foundation to start. What are some benefits, challenges that we see? And then we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to look at some adjacent industries and their use cases to, spark some ideas that we might be able to use. We're going to go through a section of what I'm kind of calling digital twins and. So we're going to talk about some other buzzwords that we're hearing a lot. We're going to talk about some blockchain, the metaverse, and then also how we can use it for leadership development, which is pretty interesting. And then we'll kind of end with this getting started. How are we using BIM to help us get started? And then, what questions should we be asking to really help facilitate this? Before we start, I want to at least kind of go over, a very simplistic history of digital twins and really just highlight a handful of some of the major topics that have kind of come up along the way. So if any of you have seen the Apollo 13, the movie about Apollo 13, the space mission, that's actually where this concept of digital twins really kind of originated. And NASA created this, it's a mirrored system, and it's a precursor to digital twins. There's a scene in the movie where they talk about trying to, in their office, they're taking all the parts and pieces that exist also on the spaceship, and they're sort of creating this mirror system of trying to solve a problem. The next thing that we have is in 1999, some folks over at Procter & Gamble sort of coined the term of Internet of Things. It's really this idea of how we can have physical objects through sensors and technology start to share information and technology back and forth, via the internet and via data transfer. And all of these things sort of building up to what ultimately is going to be what we experience today as a digital twin. In 2013, cloud computing really starts to gain sufficient traction to support digital twins, because we're going to be talking a lot about data and how data transfers. In 2018, futurist Thomas Frey predicted by the year 2022, so where we are right now, 85% of all Internet of Things platforms would have some sort of digital twin monitoring. So really what this is telling us is it's gaining more traction, whether our industry is a little behind or ahead, that's to be determined, but it's gaining traction. We see in 2020, the U.S. National Institute of Standards and Technology published a framework for digital twins in manufacturing. So now we see we're getting to the point where we're creating standards and guidelines to help facilitate digital twins. And then finally, in 2021, the estimates were really suggested that by 2021, half of all large industrial companies will be using digital twins for something, right? So before we can dig too deep into it, let's start with kind of some simple definitions so that we're all on the same page, because it's a very vast topic. You can look around and you'll find 100 different definitions that are different than the one that I'm presenting today. But we're looking at just a digital reflection of a physical object or a system, okay? And then what we're going to talk a lot about, or we're going to hear a lot about, is this idea of data. So the digital twin isn't static. It's responsive. It evolves over time. And really, as more data is brought into it, from whether it's AI or sensors or Internet of Things, that's really what's creating this digital twin. Otherwise, it's really just kind of, a mirror reflection of just the physical aspect. But having all the data really creates what we're going to call a digital twin. And then finally, it's important to kind of note that not all digital twins are going to be the same. So for one project, it may just be simple editable data, while another project may be, this fully mature model used for simulation. But both could be considered digital twins. And so I think what's important is when we're trying to apply it to our business or, in our industry, there is no one size fits all. There are different definitions. There are different definitions on different projects. And so understanding that, I think, is going to be important for, future adoption. Now, if you've been on any of the other presentations I've given on digital twins, there's been a few of them. I have this same slide, and I think it's important. The next two slides are really talking about data. And I really like this quote from Paul Serene, in which he says, we live in a world that's data-driven, and we need to treat data as an asset and really consider changing our business model. Because without the data and understanding data, we can't apply technology properly. So I saw somewhere else even that, data is like the new oil. It's a very important asset that we have to be able to not only protect, but consider changing our business. Now, data is a loaded word. It can mean a lot of things. Here, we're just talking about the data that would go inside a digital twin, whether that's facility management data, operational manuals for equipment, data for energy simulation, any of that is where we're really looking at. And then, I like this last one, even though it doesn't necessarily relate, but it's important, is that it really starts with a problem we're trying to solve, and it's never about just putting technology on the problem. So understanding what are we trying to solve with the digital twin is first and foremost most important for long-term adoption, so that we're not just using it because it sounds cool or, it has a buzzwordy name, but really, are we using it for the right reason? So I mentioned it's all about the data. Okay, well, where is this data coming from? So for a digital twin, we're really collecting real-time data with sensors, this idea of Internet of Things. And one of the major use cases is being able to predict simulations or conduct predictive simulations. We can also help these sensors can also analyze the operation. It can analyze the environmental and financial data that we're collecting. And it's starting to sort of give us a more overall holistic view of perhaps our facility, my office building. So I'm now using these sensors to collect data about how is it being operating, or what are the operations going, environmentally, what is it? Is there enough daylighting? Is the energy for the HVAC? All of those things we're kind of looking at. Even now we're seeing things, digital twins being used for path of travel and trying to monitor big groups as we kind of come out of COVID. And then obviously there's a financial component to all of this. Then finally, the real-time data that we're collecting is also used to do that social analysis. So just like I said, how are users interacting in the space? So now we can simulate when I'm in an office building or I'm an operator of an office building. I can simulate people coming in. How are they using my product? How are they using the space? Are they using the building the way I expected? Not only can I monitor all of those things and make predictive changes as needed, maybe to facilitate future renovations, but I also can run those simulations during the design process as I'm trying to facilitate what exactly do our occupants want to see. Okay, so we kind of understand at a high level what it is. We're really talking about this reflection of the physical environment in more of a digital form. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits that we see, and then we'll talk a couple about the challenges. So one thing about digital twins is it really is going to help us provide new insight for better ROI, energy savings, maintenance, performance, a lot of that owner operator back end stuff. But say as an architect, my background's in architecture, I can now be a good steward in my design, because I can start to simulate these things so that I'm handing over to an owner a building that's going to work the way I expect it to work. It's going to work the way I've designed it. But it's also I'm taking into account things like what are their operating costs going to be and what are their energy savings going to be. So what are some of the benefits? Well, one, I've said simulation a lot, right? So this idea of being able to test what if scenarios. We can look in impact of how does the design need to change based on the uses or how it's being used. I'm sure a lot of us in the time we've created things. A good example, I guess, of this would be as time goes on, a project, we may design a project to work one way, and then as people actually get into it, we find that they're using it differently. And through these simulations, through this data collection, we can identify those and perhaps make changes down the road. And, if you've ever walked in a field anywhere and you see there's just this random path that it's just dirt, the grass is gone, and it's not a sidewalk, it's just a straight line. I'd see it on campus all the time. That effectively is how the operator or the participants of that space determined that the sidewalk was not the way that they wanted to use that space, but the straight line through the grass was. And over time, more people walk through that, and what we started to see is a path get created. Well, in a way, the building or the path or the space wasn't used the way we expected. Had we been able to simulate it, perhaps we could have simulated how do people walk through this space, and is this the direct route, and do we need to reconsider some of these things? So simulation. Also make improved decision making from a financial standpoint. So whether this is the architect doing this on behalf of the owner or the owner doing it after they've taken over the project, but we're able to make better financial decisions that really can help extend the value and life cycle of our operating assets. And that directly ties into this idea of predictive maintenance. So what are digital twins being used for? Well, a lot of people are using them for analyzing data of say a RTU unit on the roof or a boiler in the basement, but we're analyzing the data about that compared to perhaps say the operator manual that has check it every so often, and we're putting out predictive maintenance to be more proactive. I have a smart thermostat, and I get an alert every time it's time for me to change my filter. Now I don't do it as often as I probably should. So that's on me, but I could be more proactive by reacting to the data and having more of a predictive maintenance of when do I need to do these versus a reactive that it's already broke, now we need to fix it. And then finally, there's this idea too of remote monitoring, and we'll see an example in a few minutes of this, but users are able to really monitor and control systems remotely. So having a digital system or a digital twin, they're able to remotely manage aspects of that building from wherever they are. So what are some of the challenges? Well, one, there's lots of data, all right? So we've been collecting data. We've heard about data for a long time. We've talked about BIM, exhaustively. So we have a lot of data to maintain and manage. With that, we need to be able to structure it. It needs to be searchable. And it also has to be something that can be easily used. So a lot of times we have individuals that perhaps are used to running or operating a building off a spreadsheet and a stack of manuals, and now we're throwing them into a piece of software with lots of data that can be quite overwhelming. So it is a real challenge. There's also the cost of creation that we're facing. And we need to understand what is the impact at a business level, whether it's from the value of having a digital twin or the impact of creating one, but we're talking about a lot of time and money. So it's something we have to be able to consider. And then finally, complex technologies. I mentioned, we're used to potentially running a building with, an Excel spreadsheet or a clipboard and a bunch of manuals. But now we're talking about more complex technologies. We're talking about things like artificial intelligence and cloud computing and other things. There's quite a learning curve that we have to all kind of go over. So all of that sounds potentially overwhelming for some, especially in an industry of ours, which can be a laggard to technology adoption. And I believe pretty strongly that whether we're developing an idea or we're looking to implement a new technology, we should look outside our industry and see what others are doing and take those cues and bring them back to our industry. And so the next few slides are really looking at several other industries and identifying how are they using digital twins. And so the hope is we could take that knowledge and say, okay, are we already doing it this way? Do we need to adapt the way that we're doing these? And what can we learn from other industries? So we'll start with mining. This one was pretty interesting in that it talks a lot about this idea of remote monitoring. I mentioned that's a big plus or a big benefit to digital twins. But there's a lot of areas now where mining, the mining industry is using this digital twins and remote monitoring to be able to replicate processes on the site. And they're doing this so they can either troubleshoot or optimize, whatever the workers need to do there. They're also able to do virtual simulations. So we've talked about simulations, but the concept here is that it allows the miners to track the movement of all their products with extreme accuracy across the entire globe and really streamline operations, reduce chances of theft because everything is tied back to this digital twin. So they're able to sort of monitor it all and track it, at a high level of precision. And, but, think about in our industry, we have to deal with the supply chain and the construction side and the owner side deals with many, many, many assets. And so how do we look at what the mining industry is doing for tracking their movement of products, and how do we apply that back to our industry? And then with, as the data has grown, so is the bandwidth that we have to use, and has really allowed the mining operations to monitor from many, many distances away from the physical mine. So it ties into this idea of remote monitoring. But what I even read, and I don't know if I put it in here, is what this does is this allows us the ability to create these ideas of centers of excellence. And so if there is a group of individuals who are highly sophisticated at, say, managing a mine, but they're located in a different part of the country that mine is not located in. Now, with the data and the bandwidth that we have available to us to transfer this data, we can create these sort of centers of excellence throughout the world or the country where we can pull the experts into a location and allow them to manage or monitor, in this case, a mine. So manufacturing is another area that we see digital twins used, have been used, and continue to be used. And there's kind of three big topics here, is this idea of improving system designs. And so within system designs, it kind of goes back to this idea of simulation, is we can plan and test out new production lines. We can look for problems before they arise. We can optimize the areas. Again, a lot of this is looking at how do we save time, how do we save money, all of these things that impact ourselves at a business level. And there's a lot of similarities between manufacturing and construction, and we're seeing this already with things like modular construction and DFMA, and so we're starting to blend those two together. Well, it makes a lot of sense that the next thing we start to look at is how do we take cues from what manufacturing is doing with digital twins and apply it to our industry, specifically perhaps to the construction side. One being, how do we plan out staging, or how do we look for potential issues that we're going to run into? Or, maybe I'm in a city and I'm building a tall tower, say in New York, and I don't have a lot of space for staging areas. And how can I go through a simulation for conducting when our truck's going to arrive, and how do I keep them on track? All of these things are feasible through building out these digital twins. Also testing new products. So this can apply whether we're a manufacturer or whether we're even an architect or an interior designer, but how do we test out products and update configurations to reduce risk and lower the cost of said risk. And so as a manufacturer, I can conduct a simulation and test out, a myriad of design options for a part. And maybe I'm looking to reduce material, or maybe I'm looking to strengthen something. But being able to do that simulation is first and foremost is a strong advantage to these digital twins. And then we come back to preventative maintenance or predictive maintenance. And so you'll see this is a common theme across all the industries, and it makes sense. But how can we use the data that we're collecting, identify things like outliers, spikes in usage, unexpected behaviors, or people showing up when we didn't expect them, or they using parts of our project or parts of the building that we didn't anticipate. Conducting those simulations not only will be able to help and help with the preventative maintenance, it also can have influences on future design or future renovations to a project to more accommodate or provide access to the users. And then the final one that I want to look at is the automotive industry. Again, all of these are very similar, but one thing that's really interesting here is when we're talking about digital twins in the automotive industry, we're talking about holding all of the performance of that vehicle, whether it's everything from sensor and inspection data, everything about that vehicle from service to configuration parts, all within. On one of my recent presentations about this, I sort of read about how Tesla has a digital twin for every car that they create. And in fact, they're actually able to, they could maintain it and conduct maintenance off-site because of the digital twins, and then also be able to, again, run these simulations and have all of this data connected with that vehicle. Okay, so what are some other things? Again, we talked about product testing. We can virtually experiment how different materials work. How can we optimize the design? A lot of this is talking about cost and value that we create for our users. This one's interesting, employee training. This could be applied to a lot of different businesses, but in automotive, and the same thing for manufacturing, obviously this is very similar. But how can we perhaps create a digital twin of our factory and then train our workers remotely so that they are very comfortable installing equipment or running the factory or managing aspects of it. So again, it allows us to do this training a lot faster. We can reach a larger group of people, and we reduce the cost. And then finally, from a sales perspective, with digital twins, being able to sort of release these out before the live versions exist, customers can start to give opinions on products. They can give back their feedback. They could interact with these digital twins. And before we spend a lot of money on creating, we're able to simulate, we're able to create this digital version, and then we can test it out. So, obviously there's play there. We're very used to, in our industry, we create renderings, we do walkthroughs on the architecture side. And those are really just beginning stages of digital twins, So when we talk about getting started in a little while, it shouldn't be as overwhelming because we're doing a lot of these things. We're just going to start to pull more of them together. All right, so the next thing is this idea of like digital twins and so when I was doing some research about this, I wanted to think about, okay, how do we expand the conversation of digital twins past what we've already done, past what we're already probably thinking about or we've heard about. And so that's why I wanted to kind of dive into a few different use cases. Again, the whole intent of this conversation is really how do we spur interest and get others thinking about how can I apply it to my business or to my industry. So with digital twins, well, we've talked a whole lot, darn formatting, we've talked a whole lot about data, right? So we talked a lot about data. We've also talked about things like the Internet of Things and sensors that help produce or feed that data into this digital twin. And really we're looking at like all the things that make up this digital twin. There's more complex technologies we haven't really dove deep into, but they're worth mentioning, like machine learning and artificial intelligence and cloud computing, which really helps facilitate all of these things. We talked a lot about simulation. And I want to add these three more to the conversation. So let's talk about blockchain. Let's talk about metaverse. These are things that we're probably sick of hearing, but have some important use cases. And let's talk about leadership development, which I think is a kind of interesting topic around digital twins that I hadn't really given much consideration in until I started this presentation. So when we talk about digital twins or a blockchain in digital twins, it's worth adding some type of definition. Again, there's a lot of versions, and I am no way an expert in blockchain. But what I can say is that it consists of blocks of information that record network transactions. And then each block that's created actually has a reference. I believe it's called a hash, but it's a reference back to the block before it. And so what this is doing is this creating an immutable chain of information. So you can't change what has already been on the blockchain. And we can modify it later on and add a new transaction, but there is a lot of security in blockchain, and so that's why we see it growing in popularity. We see it starting more growing in the financial sector. We see it in conversations around how it could be used on Wall Street. But at the end of the day, it is allowing us to be able to have a more secure way of transferring this data and really creating this ledger. So how does it apply to what digital twins really have to offer? Well, first and foremost, in terms of digital twins, the first thing is we have to trust the data is right. And we have to have integrity in the data that exists, so it's not manipulated. If I'm going to manage my entire facility off this virtual representation, I need it to be right. And that need or security is a huge component of what blockchain offers. So blockchain really helps us ensure that data is generated, that the data generated is rapidly and also immutably, so it's not changed as it gets delivered to the digital twin. So I feel very confident if I'm utilizing this connection of blockchain and digital twins that the data I'm collecting is right, is correct, but it hasn't been changed, so that I have faith in it when it gets into my digital twin. It also helps us provide a more secure, cost-effective, and scalable solution. And so this idea of it's bringing the digital identity and data tracking of what blockchain has into the digital twin. So there are already examples of how these two are playing together. And in fact, when I was reading about the mining, those same articles were talking about how they're leveraging blockchain. And again, it's something that we hear a lot about. It's not taken a hold yet in our industry necessarily. I think there's opportunities for it. We actually did a podcast on it if you want to go listen. But at the end of the day, when we talk about security and accuracy of data and not being able to manipulate it, it makes a lot of sense at how it could apply to digital twins. All right, so the metaverse. The metaverse is a lot of things to a lot of people. It's been the concept's been around for a very long time, I'm sure, but obviously ever since Facebook changed their name, everyone wants to talk about it. In fact, I was asked to do a panel to talk about it, and again, no way an expert. But the definition that I use there and the definition I'll use here is it's a 3D evolution of the internet. It's representing a virtual universe that can be experienced in the real world. So when you think about digital twins and metaverse, they seem like a no duh. Of course, if I have this digital representation of my my building, of course that can be used in the metaverse. But it's important to understand that when we talk about the metaverse, digital twins really have the ability to be a fundamental building block because of their intrinsic value. And so one of the things that when we think about in the metaverse is, creating worlds outside of, our imagination. And while that's absolutely possible, we also are going to have opportunities or the need to create exact replicas of the reality that we live in. And that's where digital twins come into play, right? So whether it's authentic or, with the authentic and realness, it's all about the data still. So we could create these visualizations in the metaverse, but without the data, they're not a digital twin. But once we have the data and we create this, virtual world, again, we've talked about what if scenarios, but we can start to conduct more what if scenarios. Manufacturers can hold expos in virtual rooms within the virtual space, and these will be tied right back to the actual physical element. There's a big play for retail. You can go in and shop in the virtual environment. The data is getting automatically updated in real time via digital twins. So, if I go into, I'm not saying I do this, but if I go into some store in the metaverse and I buy something, that is going to come out of the inventory of that actual store, because that data is being replicated via digital twins. From an architecture perspective, it's quite interesting because really we can start to help build cities and structures inside the metaverse. And we could start to, using that technology, visualize how are cities being used, how are they being used effectively, conducting simulations on a much larger scale, maybe an urban size scale of how we want to leverage both of these. So what we'll find is right now we're in probably the top of the hype cycle around metaverse, but as it becomes more and more mainstream and gets more and more adopted, there's going to absolutely be a play for how digital twins help support that. And again, a lot's going to come down to the data. Without that, it's really just a pretty picture. And it's actually being advertised. I looked and found this. And so this is, I don't know anything about this company, BizVerse, but what I do know is they say that it's a metaverse world with a fully digital twin of your business. And so, this is a company that helps businesses create businesses in the metaverse, right? How do we create a digital twin for that? So it's already exists. So we need to start thinking about how could we, adopt some of this technology, or how can we start to think about these type of things? This last example is one that's pretty interesting because it's one I hadn't really thought much about. But it's this idea of how digital twins have a place in organizational setting outside of just, replicating my physical environment. But, and typically a lot of times in the organizational environment, it's used for business processes. So like mirroring a process to try to refine it. But there's actually this ability, and some companies are talking about this, to create digital twins of our employees. Now, it seems a little weird, but when we actually dive into what that means, it actually makes some sense. And a lot of us already do this. So we have things like DISC assessments, and we make people do strength tests and understand, like, what are our strengths and weaknesses? We all have different learning styles. All of these things make us up as an individual, but also make us up as a professional. So we already started collecting this data, but what if we start to actually put it more in a structured way, and we can create digital twins of ourselves? And how can that then help develop a leader or develop an employee? So you could receive, these are some concepts or ideas that this could facilitate. You could receive hyper personalized suggestions based on your digital twin, whether this is for tips on training that you need. Perhaps this is tipping or providing your employer with ways to better communicate with you, or you get it ways to better communicate with your manager. And so what's happening is we're using all of this data we've already collected. We've already done these DISC assessments and these personality trait assessments and all these things. How do we pull it together? How can we start using other technologies that we've already talked about, like AI, cloud computing, creating digital twins of ourselves, but using that to really help facilitate or grow us in our professional life? So how does it help us with communication? It also helps us with how we want to receive advice. Based on our digital twin, I could get advice for all my different team members on how I should better interact with each one of those. You get career path recommendations. So, I'm on a career path that maybe I chose, maybe I fell into it, who knows? But having some way via digital twin, being able to suggest or recommend based on these 5 things, you might be better suited for looking into a path or career path on this side. Okay. So again, the idea here is not many people are talking about how digital twins impact leadership. When we think of digital twins in our industry, we immediately go right to some sort of 3D BIM model with a lot of data that we hand over to the owner. And while that's absolutely true, why not start to think about, okay, well, what are other ways or other things that influence that? How can I leverage it for management of my firm? How can I use it to help be a good steward or a good mentor to those that report to me or look up to me? And then finally, how can we look at other technologies that are already existing and start to think of ways that we'll be able to use it? Because at the end of the day, somebody's already thinking about all this. So it's better for us to start to consider those things before an outsider comes into your environment and really starts to disrupt. So as I end here, I want to talk about where should I get started. So a lot of people are going to be like, I have no clue. That sounds cool. I hear about it. I'm busy. It sounds expensive. I don't have time for that. Where do I get started if I cared about it? One thing I would say is I would care about it because your competitors are going to care about it. I don't know what this looks like yet, but I'm sure there are those that are going to use this as a competitive advantage to get work, to maintain clients, to expand their business. So we should start thinking about strategies for adopting this type of technology, like anything. But I wanted to start here with BIM just to ease a little bit of nerves in that we're all kind of starting in this direction. We've all, for the most part, been leveraging building information modeling. Now, while you can actually create a digital twin without this, right? For other industries, you can absolutely do this. But at the end of the day, what we're really looking from our perspective is this idea of a multidisciplinary model that has integrated data throughout all the project phases. So BIM really is an integral part to creating a digital twin. And in fact, it is the most efficient path to creating an accurate, high-value digital twin for those assets in our industry. So digital twins ultimately are going to become an integral part of the BIM process, if it hasn't already. As standards change and laws and contracts start to evolve, and we see, we just saw in the beginning of this that manufacturing, there was put out a manufacturing standard for digital twins. As we see more of that get adopted, whether it's with the AIA or whatever it may be, it's going to become more integral into our business and into our BIM process. And so it's good to actually start making sure, if we haven't got to doing BIM stuff, let's get there. Okay, so before you could do digital twins in our industry, let's at least make sure we're creating more intelligent models. We're doing more collaborative, coordinated models. Again, with this, we're going to be able to continue to collaborate with your owners, find out what are they needing on the back end. And so when I think about, okay, maybe I want to dip my toe into digital twins, ask your owner that you're working with, what do you need? Operationally, what do you need from this model to be able to do what you need to do, and then help deliver that data to them, okay? Also ask questions. What are you creating? So when we think about, hey, we're making a digital twin, well, what actually are we creating with this? And like we said in the beginning, a digital twin for one project may be totally different than a digital twin for another project. So what is it we're actually creating, and what is our end goal? In fact, yesterday I sat in a meeting and we talked about things like level of development. It's a term some of us may have heard. And when we want to say, I don't know how much detail to put into, or level of detail, I don't know how much detail to put into my model. The question fundamentally to ask is, at the end of the day, what do you need to quantify something, to cost something? Who's the final deliverable to? What do they need for? Figure out all of those things. So ask yourself, what are you creating? How are teams going to access the assets, and how are they going to collaborate together? So as we're building our digital twins, we have a lot of team members. Right now, before you even start doing it, start to ask yourself, how will we all collaborate together? How are our team members going to access this? Are there steps we could take to help get us to what would become a digital twin? So don't just think, oh man, I have to tomorrow build a digital twin. Think about, that's my ideal state. That's my end goal. What do I need to do to get there? Well, I need to start adopting some type of technology that can help facilitate, say, we'll say the BIM part. I need to identify what data my owner is going to start to need to collect. I need to think about how am I going to collaborate with others. I need to think about how I'm going to simulate, or how am I going to share the data. I need to think about, we talked about simulation a lot. I need to think about, how do I take simulation data and actually turn it into a decision? Even if I don't have that data yet, just think about, what would I do if I ran a simulation and determined that I needed more windows on the west side of my building? How would I facilitate that change, or would I facilitate that change? Think about how your tools fit together, right? So you maybe already have a lot of tools. Start to think about how all of them connect. Again, we're headed to this ideal state, but again, how do all these different tools connect together so that we know that we're adopting the right things? And also choose the correct tools. So understand, what is your workflow? Understand what is your end state or your end goal. Investigate cloud options if you have the ability to. But make sure you're choosing the right tools so that you can incrementally build towards what would become a final deliverable of a digital twin. And with that, I'm done.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christopher, walking us through that. I have to say, I really love this content, especially the concept of a digital twin for leadership development. I never thought about that. And I think that is just so innovative, Like, I really just, across multiple channels or industries, I think that could be a useful resource. So thank you so much for that content.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big proponent for whatever it is you're doing, whether you're talking about digital twins or whatever, look to other industries. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of us that are running a business that exists in other industries. But look at how others have solved problems, and then think about, how do I apply that to my workflow or my industry?
This is true. I love it. I really do. All right, guys. So I wanted to take the opportunity to open up the chat box for any additional questions, comments, so you guys can plug those in. And we'll just take a little bit of time to allow for that. I think you did a really great job with making this digestible. We do have a question here. Can you give us an example of a digital twin software platform?
Yeah, so there's one, well, I can't, okay, one, Autodesk has one that they've started to put out called Tandem. There is another one, and I'll have to look it up maybe while other questions come in. We actually sat in on a demonstration of one. It's not Twinmotion, Twin Automation maybe, Twinmation. I'll look it up before this is over. But in general, what that one is that one's really geared towards the data, and that one's interesting because they reached out to a whole bunch of operators and owners and operators and really asked the question, what do you need? And they built a system that was more geared towards that. So it doesn't have all the pretty, they can integrate some of the pretty pictures, but it is focused on the data. So I'll look that up real quick while we take other questions. But again, Autodesk has one with Tandem, and that's one that's out there.
Okay.
I don't think they will. I don't think they're gonna agree. I saw it come through. Yeah, I don't think they'll agree on a definition, and I think that's okay. There's a lot of different definitions out there, and I'm gonna ask. I'm gonna see if I can get that answer real quick. There's a lot of digital twin definitions out there, and what we found is it is limiting if we just agree on one. I actually did a presentation with somebody way back when, and we said, we won't make a lot of progress until we decide on that definition. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think what's more important is for us to understand, at an essence, what is it, and recognize that it's different for each project. And having that understanding, I think, helps us adapt more. Oh, it was Intermation. Intermation is this other company that is a digital twin platform that's out there. really cool, focused on the data, some really cool integrations as well. That and Tandem are kind of the two, but there's a lot out there. Those are just the two that I have on top of mind.
Okay, cool. We do have another question that came in from Vernon. What would you recommend to capture as built for digital twin, for the digital twin?
I'd say any type of scanning apparatus, LiDAR scanning, whatever it may be, those are heavily what is being used when we're doing our laser scanning of our projects in that as-built form. And then what we see is there are other products like Inmation is one that's able to pull that data in, and you can see it in real time. And so there's a lot of cool aspects there. I don't think there is necessarily one laser. I'm not a laser scanning expert, so I can't say there's one that works better than anything else. But that is really what the general technology is being used.
Awesome. All right. I'll allow a little bit of time if anyone has any additional comments or questions here. Okay. All right, Phil says, do you see digital twins disrupting traditional construction documents?
Hi, Phil. I think I want to say yes, but I think that's the idealistic view. I believe that until the code and contracts change, so code requirements, the code officials, until they evolve, I don't think it's going to replace it yet. I think what can happen is if we're able to educate and put more pressure on, that county official. I mean, because if you think about it, at the end of the day, we're putting all this effort in, and we may be delivering 3D models, but I know where I live, the local county, they want a PDF set, and that's all they care about. So I think until we can get over that hurdle, which may take some time, it's gonna be a while. What we need is more innovative, honestly, like more innovative municipalities that are willing to take on these type of things. Some of the things we're going to keep running into, it's like another challenge, is this idea of complex technologies, is we now need to insert someone in the county office that can manage something like this. So I don't know if we're there yet, but I do think I think it's possible. And I do think there's going to be opportunities in certain municipalities that'll absolutely allow it to take on. And the more of those that happen, maybe it puts pressure on others, because there's going to be a speed aspect there and more of an efficient way of doing it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I love the dialogue here. Jeffrey says, is the industry moving towards standardizing, oops, sorry, the question went down. Standardizing digital twin data formats?
I don't know if I can answer that. No, it's good. I'm looking at it. Since I'm not an expert necessarily, I don't know if I can answer it without it just sounding like total crap. But what I can say is that I don't, my personal opinion is I don't think so, because I don't know if it kind of goes back to, will there be a common definition? I think right now we're in this sort of first mover state where people are really trying to gain a competitive advantage. They're just out doing stuff. And as more people catch on and say, okay, well, I need to keep up, we're going to start to see us sort of come back, gravitate back to the middle a little bit and say, hey, we actually need a standard in place for some sort of protocol or some sort of data exchange. So I can't say that I know the answer to that. I just know that my gut feeling is I don't know if we are yet, because there's just not enough out there. But, it's no different than like when I read about the metaverse, and right now there's tons of them, or tons in production. Eventually things are going to the bigs are going to swallow up the littles, and we're going to start to gravitate towards the middle. So I think the same for the data formats.
Fair enough. Mark says, what are the advantages? Oh, you've got it. You are on it.
What are the advantages of data storage retrieval of the beginning with a Revit model instead of a point cloud? The way I would answer that question is, first and foremost, what do I have access to? So if I have a point cloud or a point cloud is going to be more accurate than if I went and created a Revit model just by measuring, for instance. So if we're talking about an existing building, in terms of the accuracy of the physicality, a point cloud, I think, is going to always have the better advantage. Obviously, if we're talking about new construction, there's nothing to scan, and so we're going to start with Revit. From my perspective, I think what's most important to me is a couple things. One is sheer size. So if I had to choose between the two and say accuracy, I could get past the accuracy. Is one going to be a larger size than the other? Because eventually, I mean, we talk about lots of data. We're going to run into needing more storage. We're going to run into actually having emission problems because of how much computing power and processing power we need. So I think that's one thing. I think understanding which one of those can take in data. If I could take a point cloud and I could add data to it, then I would start there, because that is the most accurate thing I can do. If I need to create a Revit project, if I need to go out and do as-builts and I put data to it, I think there's probably a tolerance that we can accept that the accuracy between the two may not be important. So, I mean, that was an easy way of not answering your question, because I don't know if there is an advantage. I think a lot's going to depend on what accuracy. So what are we creating? What is the accuracy that I need? Is size an issue in terms of long-term financial storage or transfer? And in which one of those can I put data into and manage the data? No matter which one of whatever the answer is, whatever the most check boxes are, I think that's the one you start with. And it may not be the same for each project. A large project, there's probably an economy of scale. A very large project, you're better off with a point cloud. Very small project, you probably could get away with more of a Revit model.
All right, fantastic. Okay, guys, looks like we have reached kind of a limit there on the questions, but I have absolutely enjoyed this dialogue. I love it when we have the engagement like that. And Christopher, you did an amazing job bringing this great content today. And I want to thank everyone who has joined us today. Yeah, we do appreciate you spending time with us, and trust it was meaningful and impactful for you and your business. And we do look forward to seeing you on future webinars. So thanks, guys. Have a wonderful day.
Bye.